These three disturbing Christmas horror stories are inspired by real events. First, a routine photo with Santa turns sinister when a whispered secret leaves a little girl paralyzed with fear, unaware that the man in the red suit has already marked them as his next target. Next, a woman trusts the waving neighbor across the courtyard to keep her safe, only to realize his watchful eye isn't protecting her. It's waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And finally, a military veteran with PTSD is hunted through a festive suburb by an aggressive police officer who vanishes without a trace. Make sure you watch until the very end, because when the chase ends in total silence, you'll be left wondering if he escaped a killer or if the enemy was in his head the whole time. Alexis thought the mall Santa photo was just another Christmas tradition until a man named Kenneth whispered a threat in her daughter Delaney's ear that made her go silent. They found a candy cane with a twisted message on it in the parking lot, and a red pickup truck started appearing outside their house every single night. Christmas in the Chandler area of Phoenix is a strange beast. You don't get snow, and you don't get that quiet winter feeling people talk about in songs. You get dry heat and a sun that glares off the asphalt even in December. But people still force the holiday spirit. You see it at the Chandler Fashion Center Mall. They blast the air conditioning until it's freezing and pump in that smell of artificial cinnamon and pine to cover up the scent of thousands of people rushing around. It's a comfort zone for a lot of folks. A place where you can pretend the world is safe and predictable for a few hours. For Alexis, that safety was everything. She was 32, a single mom working as a dental hygienist. Her whole life was about details, checking charts, cleaning teeth, making people comfortable. She didn't scare easily. That Saturday, December 15th, 2018, was supposed to be routine. It was just a job she had to do. A box to check for the holiday season. Get the annual picture of her 6-year-old daughter, Delaney, sitting on Santa's lap. Getting to the mall was a hassle in itself, fighting for a parking spot in a sea of cars. But she managed it around 2 p.m. Delaney was still at that perfect age where she bought into the magic of it all, 100%. She was a first grader, bright-eyed, holding Alexis's hand tight while they waited in that long, winding line behind the velvet ropes. You know the type. Parents looking at their phones, kids running around or crying. Just normal chaos. When they finally got to the front, the guy in the red suit looked the part. His name turned out to be Kenneth, but nobody knew that then. He was using a fake ID. He was a big guy, late 40s, heavy build. He had the suit, the boots, the professional setup. He looked like every other guy who takes a seasonal job to make some extra cash in December. Ordinary. Delaney climbed up on his knee and smiled for the camera. It was a real smile, wide and happy. The camera flashed, and the job should have been done right there. But then Kenneth leaned in close. He didn't ask her what she wanted for Christmas. He didn't do the loud, jolly routine for the parents watching. He just lowered his head until his mouth was right next to her ear. He spoke so quietly that Alexis couldn't hear a word from where she was standing. Changes in kids happen fast, but this was instant. It was like someone reached over and flipped a switch. 1 second she was beaming, and the next she went stiff as a board. Her smile didn't just fade away, it vanished. She looked like all the air had been punched out of her. Kenneth pulled back and looked at Alexis. He gave her this quick, dismissive smile. The kind you give a customer when you want them to move along, and said, "Just asked if she's been a good girl." Something was wrong. Alexis knew it immediately. You learn to trust your gut in situations like that. Delaney didn't say a word. She climbed off his lap and grabbed her mom's hand so hard her knuckles turned white. They walked out of the mall and into the parking lot at 2:30 p.m., and the silence between them was heavy. It wasn't the quiet of a tired kid. It was the quiet of someone who is scared stiff. Alexis kept trying to get her to talk. She asked, "What did he say, honey? You can tell me." But Delaney just shook her head and kept walking, looking at the ground. Walking through a mall parking lot in Arizona takes it out of you. The heat radiates up from the blacktop. They finally got to the car, and Alexis started fishing for her keys. She was distracted, watching her daughter, trying to figure out what had just happened. That's when she spotted it. Resting on the ground, right next to the driver's side tire, was a candy cane. Candy canes are common trash in December, usually dropped by some kid. But Alexis looked closer. It wasn't just a piece of candy. The wrapper was white, but someone had taken a thick black marker, a Sharpie, and written on it. It wasn't a holiday greeting. It wasn't a price tag. It was a message, written in small, jagged letters. "He knows when you've been sleeping, so be good for goodness sake." Reading those lyrics on a piece of trash in a hot parking lot didn't feel festive. It felt like a promise. It felt like a threat. Panic hits you physically. It sits heavy in your chest before your brain catches up. Her blood went ice cold. This wasn't an accident. You don't accidentally write lyrics about watching someone sleep on a candy cane and leave it next to a stranger's tire. This was a message. It was a delivery. She snapped her head up and scanned the rows of cars. 3 rows over, she saw it. A Dodge Ram pickup truck. Big, bright red, aggressive looking. It was just sitting there with the engine idling. You could hear the low sound of the exhaust. The windows were tinted dark black, so dark you couldn't see inside at all. It was just a big red metal box reflecting the sun. But she knew someone was in there. She could feel eyes on her. It was waiting. Alexis didn't waste time looking for a driver. She grabbed Delaney, threw her into the back seat, and jumped into the driver's seat. She locked the doors before she even put the key in the ignition. Her hands were shaking so bad she almost dropped the keys, but she got the engine turned on and peeled out of there. She didn't look back until she was on the main road. That was the start of it. That was the moment she realized this wasn't just a creepy interaction. It was an incursion. Someone had breached their safety. They got home, and Alexis locked every door and checked every window. She tried to act normal for Delaney's sake, but the kid was broken. She wouldn't eat dinner. She wouldn't watch TV. Finally, around 10 o'clock that night, December 15th, Alexis got her into bed. Delaney was curled up in a ball, terrified. That's when she finally whispered what the man had said to her. "I know where you live, and I'm going to visit you when you're sleeping." Hearing those words coming from a 6-year-old is enough to make any parent sick. The candy cane lyrics made sense now. It wasn't a song. It was a statement of intent. Alexis grabbed her phone and called the mall immediately. She got a security guard on the line, but he was useless. He basically told her that the Santa operation was run by an outside vendor. He took a report, but you could tell he didn't care. He was just a guy punching a clock. He said there wasn't much they could do since he was a contracted vendor. Alexis hung up and walked to the front window to check the locks again. She pulled back the curtain just an inch to peek outside. Her heart nearly stopped. Across the street, parked under the darkness, was the red Dodge Ram. It hadn't been there 30 minutes ago. It was just sitting there, dark and silent, a massive shape taking up space in her quiet suburban neighborhood. She called the police non-emergency line right then. When the officer arrived, he drove by slowly. He found the truck legally parked. It was empty. The officer was polite, but he gave her the same answer the mall guard did. A truck legally parked is not a threat. There was no crime committed. By 2 a.m., the truck was gone. The next day, December 16th, Alexis didn't send Delaney to school. She stayed home and went to work on her laptop. She called the mall again and demanded the name of the vendor company. They gave it to her. She Googled the name immediately. Nothing but a P.O. box. No reviews. No physical office. She called the number listed, and it went to a voicemail that was full. She didn't stop there. She went on Facebook, searching for the Chandler Mall Santa. That's when she found the comments. 3 or 4 other parents were talking about the same guy. They said he was creepy. They said their kids came back from the photo session quiet, acting strange. She wasn't the only one, but being right didn't make her feel better. It just made her feel isolated. She was seeing a pattern that the police and the mall security were ignoring. Night fell again. That second night was worse than the first because now she knew he had been there. She slept with an aluminum baseball bat next to the bed. Every creak of the house settling sounded like a footstep. At 11:45 p.m., the silence broke. The doorbell rang. It wasn't a quick, polite press. It was a long, hard hold that echoed through the house. Alexis was out of bed in a split second. She grabbed the bat. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She crept down the hallway to the front door and looked through the peephole. Nothing. Just the empty concrete porch. She backed away from the door, gripping the bat until her hands hurt. She didn't open it. She wasn't stupid. Then she remembered the technology she had installed. The Ring camera. She pulled her phone out of her pocket and opened the app. Her hands were trembling, making it hard to tap the screen, but she got the footage to load. There he was, in black and white night vision. It was the same build as the Santa. Tall, heavy, broad shoulders. He walked right up to the camera and looked directly into the lens. He knew it was there. He reached out, pressed the button, and held it. He stood there for a moment, just staring at the house, letting them know he was close. Then, slowly and deliberately, he turned and walked down the driveway. He walked out to the street, opened the door of the red Dodge Ram, and drove off. Alexis dialed 911 immediately. This time, she didn't use the non-emergency line. She had video proof. The police came back out around 12:30 a.m. on December 17th. They watched the footage. They saw the truck. And this time, they managed to get a partial read on the license plate from the video. They ran it. It came back to a rental agency, Enterprise. The truck had been rented a week ago, but the name on the rental agreement was Michael Patterson. It was a fake name. The ID used was a forgery. The credit card was a prepaid Visa bought with cash. The guy, whoever he was, had covered his tracks. He was a ghost. But the police told her something else that made her realize how big this was. Officers confirmed that 2 other families in the area had reported the exact same thing. A trip to the mall Santa, a red truck parked on their street, and a doorbell ringing just before midnight. This guy, Kenneth, wasn't just a weirdo. He was a predator. He had exploited a massive failure in the system, the lack of strict background checks for seasonal vendors, to get access to kids. He used that access to find out where they lived. He was hunting. The mall fired the vendor immediately. The business was dissolved overnight, but they never caught Kenneth, or Michael Patterson. He just disappeared into the system. The case went cold almost as fast as it started. Alexis didn't wait around to see if he'd come back a third time. She spent the next week turning her house into a fortress. She put up motion sensor floodlights that lit up the yard if a leaf blew across the grass. She installed more cameras. It didn't stop him immediately. The red truck appeared 2 more times, once on December 19th and again on December 22nd. Always late at night. Always vanishing before the police could respond, as if the desert itself swallowed it whole. Delaney was different now. The innocence was gone. She asked her mom constantly, "Is Santa going to hurt us?" She refused to sleep in her own room. Christmas was ruined. They didn't stay at home on the 25th. They packed up and went to Alexis's sister's house just to get away from the memories. But you can't run away from that kind of fear. It travels with you. Delaney refused to go near a mall. In February 2019, Alexis sold the house. She moved to a different neighborhood, different street, different layout. But the damage was done. Delaney developed severe anxiety around strangers. The police never identified the real Santa. He's still out there somewhere. Probably working a different job, maybe in a different state, waiting for the holidays to roll around again. But here is the reality check that should scare you more than that red truck. In most of this country, there is no federal or state law that requires a background check for a mall Santa. It is entirely up to the mall or the vendor. And even when they do check, they use cheap, low-level screenings that miss guys using fake names like Michael Patterson. That Santa suit is a weapon of opportunity. It gives a predator instant authority, trust, and physical access to hundreds of kids, and parents don't ask a single question. Kenneth used that trust to get close. Then he used a fake business to disappear before the cops could even knock on his door. So never let your guard down. Ask the manager if that guy in the chair passed a vulnerable sector check. Because when you realize that holiday magic is just a thin curtain hiding a real threat, the only thing you'll hear in your head is Kenneth's whisper, "I know where you live." Naomi always waved to Gordon, the lonely old retiree across the courtyard. That changed when she saw the binoculars aimed at her window, then realized he knew her schedule by the minute. The real horror began when she came home to an unlocked door she was certain she had secured, forcing her to realize the man who watched her life might have also entered it, just in time for Christmas. Most people tell you that renting a ground-floor apartment is a smart move. You don't have to haul groceries up 3 flights of stairs. You save a little money on the rent, and you have easy access to the parking lot. Naomi, a 28-year-old elementary school teacher living in suburban Denver, thought she had scored a win when she signed her lease in March of 2017. She was single, she worked hard, and she didn't have a lot of extra cash lying around. Finding a decent place she could actually afford felt like a victory. She didn't know yet that a ground floor window is just a television screen for anyone walking by. For those first few months, life was good, quiet. Naomi settled in, and the place started to feel like a real home. Directly across the courtyard, maybe 40 feet away, lived Gordon. He was a retired postal worker, 67 years old. He looked like the kind of guy who'd return a lost wallet with all the cash still inside. From the start, he was a permanent fixture in his window. Every time Naomi came home from grading papers or picked up her mail, Gordon was there. He would give her a slow, pleasant wave. And here is the thing about trust. It builds slow. It happens in the small moments you don't even think about. March turned into April, and that wave became a ritual. It became part of Naomi's morning coffee and her evening unwind. It wasn't just polite, it felt protective. Naomi actually started to rely on him being there. You know how it is when you live alone? You hear a weird noise at night, or you worry you left the stove on. But Naomi would look out, see Gordon's lights on, see him sitting there with his newspaper, and she'd relax. She told her mom on the phone that she lucked out. She joked that she had a neighborhood watch of one. There was a day in May, a real stormy Tuesday. Naomi was wrestling a 12-pack of soda and 3 bags of groceries out of her trunk in the pouring rain. She looked up, hair plastered to her face, miserable. And there was Gordon. He wasn't leering, he wasn't making it weird. He just gave her a little salute and a sympathetic smile, like he was saying, "Hang in there, kid." It made her chuckle. It made the complex feel like a community. She let her guard down. She started leaving her blinds open a little longer in the evenings. She stopped double-checking the deadbolt every single time she walked past it. She figured she had a guardian across the way. That's what makes what happened next so twisted. She didn't just tolerate him, she liked him. She thought he was the safety net. She didn't realize he was the spider. The shift happened in July. It was hot, the kind of dry Colorado heat that bakes the pavement. Naomi was in her kitchen getting ready for the day when she glanced across that 40-foot gap of grass. Gordon was in his window, just like always. She raised her hand to give him the usual wave, but his hand didn't go up. He was holding a pair of binoculars. These weren't flimsy opera glasses. They were heavy, black, serious hardware. And he wasn't looking at the birds in the trees or checking out a car in the lot. He had those lenses pressed tight against his face, and they were leveled straight at her bedroom window. It hit her hard. That sinking feeling in your gut when you realize you've been wrong about everything. She stepped back out of view, her heart kicking against her ribs. Her brain tried to fix it. Maybe he's just looking past me, she thought. Maybe his eyesight is failing. But deep down she knew. You can feel it when someone is hunting you. August turned into September, and the excuses stopped working. Naomi was a creature of habit. School started early, so she left early. She came home at the same time every day, and Gordon learned the rhythm of her life better than she knew it herself. It got to the point where he wasn't just at the window by accident. He was waiting. As soon as her tires crunched on the asphalt of the parking lot, he would pop up. It was like he was clocked in for a shift. He would give that wave, but it didn't look friendly anymore. It looked possessive. He was sending a message. "I see you. I know exactly when you get home." By November, 40 feet wasn't close enough for him anymore. Naomi came home on November 3rd, wind blowing dead leaves across the sidewalk. She saw a package sitting on her welcome mat, just a standard delivery. But tucked underneath it, barely visible, was a piece of folded notebook paper. She picked it up. The handwriting was neat, careful, the kind of script you get after 30 years of sorting envelopes. It said, "I made sure no one took it." Now think about that. It sounds helpful on the surface, but it isn't. It means he crossed the courtyard. He walked right up to her sanctuary. He stood on her doormat, leaned down and touched her property. He invaded her space. Naomi wasn't the type to just roll over. She dealt with unruly kids for a living. She figured she could handle a nosy neighbor. On November 10th, she marched across that courtyard and knocked on his door. When Gordon opened up, the nice old man act dropped instantly. She told him to stop. She asked for boundaries, and he looked at her with eyes like flint. He didn't apologize. He didn't back down. He got defensive, aggressive. He hissed at her. "I can look out my own window. I don't need some young girl telling me what I can do on my own property." That was the moment the mask fell off completely. He wasn't hiding it anymore. He felt entitled to watch her. Then came the holiday season. Late November rolled into December, and if you think Christmas makes people behave better, you haven't seen enough of the real world. Naomi was stuck. Breaking a lease cost thousands of dollars she didn't have. She was financially trapped in that apartment, right in his line of sight. Gordon decided to decorate. He strung up two pathetic little strands of sparse white lights in his window. But right between them, framed like a picture, was his new setup. The binoculars were still there, but next to them sat a camera. It was mounted on a tripod with a massive telephoto lens. It became a permanent fixture of her December. Every time she opened her blinds, that lens was there, a glass eye that didn't blink. He was documenting her life. She went to the apartment management. She begged them for help, but corporate landlords are all the same. They looked at the lease, shrugged, and told her, "Unless he breaks a law, Naomi, our hands are tied." He was technically inside his own unit. They wouldn't lift a finger. Naomi was on her own. December 18th. That was the day the bottom fell out. It was the last day of work before her Christmas break. Naomi was exhausted. She had spent weeks living with her blinds drawn, walking around her own home like a prisoner. She pulled into her parking spot, grabbed her bag, and walked to her door. Routine is a powerful thing. When you do something every day, your body remembers exactly how it feels. You know how much force it takes to turn your key. You know the sound the deadbolt makes when it slides back. Naomi put her key in the lock. She braced her wrist to turn it against the weight of the bolt. But the key turned through thin air. There was no resistance, no click. The lock was already disengaged. She stopped dead. Her hand hovered over the knob. She knew she had locked that door. She checked it every single morning. She rattled the handle before she left. She was obsessed with security because of the man across the way. There was zero chance she left it open. She gave the door a little push. It scraped against the jamb and drifted open. Silence. The apartment should have been empty, but the air inside felt heavy. It felt disturbed. It smelled stale, like someone had been standing there just minutes ago. Naomi didn't call out. She stepped inside, careful not to make a sound. Her heart was hammering against her ribs. She pushed the door shut behind her. The living room looked okay. The TV was there. Laptop on the table. A thief takes the easy money. A thief grabs the electronics and runs. But nothing was missing here. She walked down the short hallway to her bedroom. The carpet muffled her boots. She stopped in the doorway. Everything looked mostly right. Bed was made, closet door was shut. Then she saw the dresser. One drawer was pulled out, just an inch or two, a small gap in the wood. But Naomi was neat. She didn't leave drawers open. She walked over to it. She looked inside. Her clothes were shifted around, messed up, and there were empty spots, specific spots. Her underwear was gone. This wasn't about money. This was about possession. This was someone coming into her most private space, putting their hands on her things, and taking a souvenir. It's a violation that makes your skin crawl. She backed out of the apartment and called the cops. They showed up the next day, December 19th. Now that there was a break-in, now that items were stolen, they could finally do something. They got a warrant for Gordon's place. Naomi watched from her window as they went in. When the officers came back out, they were carrying evidence bags. And what they found in that old man's apartment turns this from a creeper story into a nightmare. It wasn't just a casual interest. It was a job to him. They found the clothes, stashed like trophies. They found a shiny brass copy of her apartment key. He hadn't picked the lock. He had a pass to come and go as he pleased. But the centerpiece of the collection was a 3-ring binder. On the spine, written in permanent marker, was her name, Naomi. Inside, there were over 200 photos, timestamps, a logbook of her schedule. But as the lead officer was logging the evidence, he noticed something about the spine of the binder. There was a piece of masking tape under her name. He peeled it back. Underneath Naomi, written in that same careful script, was Volume 4. Naomi wasn't special to him. She wasn't a unique obsession. She was just the 4th season of his favorite show. There were 3 other women, 3 other binders, 3 other lives he had dismantled before he ever moved to this complex. She was just part of a collection. And the horror didn't stop with Gordon. During the investigation, the police subpoenaed the apartment management's emails to build a timeline. Naomi thought the management was just lazy. Turns out they were complicit. Buried in the inbox of the property manager, they found emails from 2 years prior. Complaints from a woman who lived in Naomi's unit before her. Complaints about Gordon staring. Complaints about him following her to her car. And the internal reply from the manager? It was short and brutal. Ignore it. He pays 6 months in advance, cash. Don't rock the boat. They knew. They knew he was a predator. They knew he targeted that specific ground floor unit. But the rent check cleared, so they let him stay. They let him wait for the next girl. Gordon was arrested. Burglary, stalking, but the courts are crowded. He pleaded down to trespassing. He got probation. He walked free. Naomi couldn't move. She still had months on her lease. She had to stay in that apartment, the one he had keys to, the one management knew was a trap. She spent her Christmas break behind a barricaded door, looking at the empty window across the way, wondering where volumes 1, 2, and 3 ended up. So tonight when you get home, take a good look across the courtyard. Look at the friendly guy who always waves. Because Naomi learned the hard way that a wave isn't always a greeting. Sometimes it's a head count. And if you think a locked door keeps you safe, remember that the person with the spare key might be watching you right now, just waiting for Volume 5 to start. Christmas night in a strange Indiana suburb was supposed to be peaceful. But for a veteran like Edward, peace is fragile. A neighbor's accusation and a cop's scream triggered a desperate fence-jumping sprint for survival. But when the chase ended in total, impossible silence, Edward was left with the most terrifying question of all. Was he running from a predator, or was he running from his own mind? You have to understand the man to understand why this went sideways so fast. Edward isn't just a guy who served. He is a man who carries 20 years of the military in his bones. He's an accountant now, living a quiet life back in Maryland. But the service doesn't just leave you when you hand in the uniform. It leaves cracks in the foundation. He calls it cumulative service trauma, but most people just know it as PTSD. It means his brain works differently. It means routine isn't just a preference, it's a structural necessity. It's the scaffolding that keeps the roof from caving in on his head. That's why he was out there. It was 7:45 p.m. The family dinner at his brother-in-law's house had been heavy. Too much food, too much heat, too much noise. Edward felt the walls closing in. He needed to regulate. He needed to move his legs and breathe air that wasn't recycled. So, he told the family he was going to look at the lights, zipped up his coat, laced up his heavy winter boots, and stepped out into the night. This wasn't his turf. He was in a suburb on the edge of Indianapolis, Indiana, and honestly, the place looked like a movie set. It was 8 p.m., pitch black overhead, but down on the street, it was bright as day. Every single house was lit up. We're talking professional-grade displays. The brick mansions were outlined in crisp white LEDs. The trees were wrapped tight in red and green strands. There were inflatable snowmen and glowing reindeer on every lawn. It was beautiful, sure, but it was also intense. It was a perfect, glowing bubble of safety, totally cut off from the real world. Edward walked with a purpose. He wasn't strolling. He was marching, 4, maybe 5 blocks away from the safety of the in-laws' house. He was actually feeling good. He was digesting the turkey, getting his head right. He was admiring the displays, squinting a little against the glare of a million tiny bulbs reflecting off the frost. He listened to the heavy, muffled clomp-clomp of his thick rubber soles on the concrete. Those boots were built for snow and ice, insulated and heavy, making every step feel deliberate. Then, about 5 minutes into the walk, around 7:50 p.m., the first domino fell. He was passing a driveway when a garage door started to grind open. It was slow and loud in the quiet street. The automatic light clicked on, flooding the driveway with a harsh yellow glare that clashed with the soft Christmas lights. A woman was standing there. She wasn't getting into a car. She wasn't looking for a shovel. She was standing right in the middle of the concrete slab, staring dead at him. Edward didn't stop. He was still in that good mood, surrounded by all that holiday cheer. He looked over, expecting a wave. But she spoke first, and her voice cut through the festive air like a razor. "Can I help you?" she called out. It wasn't friendly. It was an interrogation. "What are you doing? You looking to steal something?" Edward blinked. It threw him off. He looked around, lights twinkling, plastic Santas waving in the breeze, and then back at her. He tried to keep it positive. He tried to save the interaction. He smiled, waved a hand, and gave her the benefit of the doubt. "No, ma'am," he called back, keeping his voice bright. "Just a visitor. I'm admiring the lights. Merry Christmas." He thought that would fix it. He thought she'd realize her mistake and wave back. She didn't. She didn't care about his Christmas spirit. She took a step forward, her face hardening. "I don't know who you are," she snapped. "I'm calling the police. You need to stop walking and wait right there." That's when the mood broke. The festive feeling evaporated. Edward felt a flash of suppressed confusion mixed with a sharp spike of anger. Wait right there? Like he was a dog? He hadn't done anything wrong. He was a grown man, a veteran standing in a winter wonderland, being treated like a criminal by a woman who was scared of her own shadow. He didn't yell. He used his wits. He looked at her, shook his head, and pointed down the street with a gloved hand. "Okay," he said, his voice tight. "Feel free to tell the cops I'll be 10 minutes down the road this way." He turned his back on her. It was a power move. "I'm not hiding. I'm telling you exactly where I'll be because I have nothing to fear." He kept walking his planned route. He didn't run. He just walked, the heavy tread of his boots scraping against the pavement. He thought he had made his point. But the clock was ticking. 10 minutes later, at 8 p.m. exactly, the situation escalated from an annoyance to a crisis. Edward saw the flashing lights first, red and blue splashing against the festive green and white decorations on the houses. It looked wrong, like a stain on a painting. A single Indiana police cruiser rolled up the street. It didn't have its siren wailing, just the lights cutting through the darkness. The officer pulled up alongside Edward and stopped. This was the moment Edward thought logic would win. He had told the woman where he would be. He was expecting this. He stopped. He turned to the officer, who was still sitting in the driver's seat with the window rolled down. He respected the uniform because he had worn a uniform. He started to explain. "Officer," he said, keeping his voice level, "I'm Edward. I'm from Maryland. I'm visiting family just down the street. That lady back there was confused." He laid it all out, the facts, the logic, the truth. But the officer wasn't listening. He looked at Edward with dead, flat eyes. He didn't ask for ID. He didn't ask a single question. He just issued a command through the open window. "Get on the ground." Edward stood his ground. He was confused, but he held onto his dignity. He was an innocent man, a veteran, standing under the glow of streetlights and Christmas decorations, and he wasn't going to crawl in the dirt for no reason. He looked the officer in the eye and spoke politely but firmly. "No," Edward said. "I'm not doing that. I haven't done anything wrong." That was the turning point. The officer didn't like no. The car door swung open. The officer stepped out, rising to his full height in the glare of the headlights. His hand hovered near his belt. The threat wasn't just verbal anymore. It was physical. He took a step toward Edward, invading his space, and screamed the order this time. "Get on the ground, now!" You need to understand what that escalation does to a man with 20 years of service trauma. When the officer got out of the car, the situation shifted from a conversation to a combat scenario. The yelling wasn't just noise, it was a trigger. It was a trauma flashback. Instant and overwhelming. The reality of the suburban street dissolved. The cheerful Christmas lights blurred into streaks of enemy fire. His logic center shut down, and his survival instinct kicked the door down and took the wheel. His training screamed at him. Do not submit. Do not make yourself a target. The injustice of it hit him like a physical blow. He had been polite. He had tried to de-escalate. And this officer was treating him like an animal. Edward didn't think. The rage and the fear tore out of his throat before he could stop them. "I'm not fucking getting on the ground!" It was the breaking point. He had rejected the submission. Now he had to choose flight. It was 8:02 p.m. Edward spun on his heel and launched himself into a dead sprint. This wasn't a jog. This was a tactical retreat. He was 41 years old, but the muscle memory was still there. The only problem was his feet. He was wearing those heavy, insulated winter boots. They were like lead weights tied to his ankles. They weren't made for speed. They were made for trudging through snow. Every step was a flat-footed, heavy slam against the asphalt. Clomp, clomp, clomp. He tore down the sidewalk, his mind racing faster than his legs. He knew exactly where he was. He was one street over from his brother-in-law's house. He did the math instantly. If he stayed on the sidewalk, he had to go all the way to the corner, turn right, and come back up the next block. That was a 10-minute walk. In a chase, 10 minutes is a lifetime. But if he cut through the yard right next to him, he looked at the house on his right. It was lit up like Times Square. Twinkling icicle lights hung from the gutters. A glowing plastic Santa waved from the porch. Through the big bay window, Edward could see the warm yellow glow of a living room. He saw silhouettes of people moving inside, maybe eating dessert, opening presents, totally oblivious. It was a surreal nightmare. Inside, it was silent night. Outside, on the lawn, it was fight or flight. He swerved off the pavement and into the stranger's front lawn. He was running on pure instinct now. The frost-covered grass was slick under his boots. The yard was an obstacle course of decorations. He had to dodge a line of plastic candy canes lining the walkway. He nearly tripped over a wire running to a spotlight. He could hear the lighter, faster boots of the officer hitting the pavement behind him, the shout of surprise and anger. The cop was still on the street, losing ground as Edward cut the angle. He tore through the side yard, his winter boots chewing up the perfectly manicured turf. He hit the backyard, lungs burning in the cold air. The fence loomed up in front of him, a solid wooden privacy fence. This was the only barrier between him and safety. He didn't slow down. He couldn't. He hit the fence with speed, planted the thick rubber toe of his boot against the wood, and vaulted. It was a move he had done 1,000 times in combat boots, but these winter boots were clumsy. He cleared the top, but the heavy heel clipped the wood hard. He landed on the other side, his brother-in-law's yard, the impact jarring his knees. He didn't stop to look back. He scrambled across the familiar grass, those 30 seconds feeling like the longest of his life. He saw the back of the house. He hit the door handle, burst into the kitchen, and slammed it shut behind him. He stood there in the kitchen, severe tremors racking his body. He was shaking so hard his teeth chattered. His chest heaved, gasping for air that felt too hot after the freezing run. The heavy winter boots felt like anchors now, gluing him to the linoleum floor. The adrenaline crash was hitting him like a freight train. The family looked up, terrified. They saw a man who looked like he had just escaped a war zone right there in their holiday kitchen. But his wife didn't scream. She didn't ask about the police or the neighbor. She saw the 1,000-yard stare in his eyes, the shaking hands, the sweat. She knew that look. She walked straight to her purse, dug around for a second, and came back with a small orange bottle. She shook 2 pills into her palm and pressed them into Edward's hand. "Here," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Take your meds. Now." She wasn't looking at the door, waiting for a cop to kick it in. She was looking at him, and in that moment, Edward felt a different kind of fear. It was a quiet, sinking feeling. Her gesture said, "I love you and I support you. But I don't know if I believe you." It implied that maybe the war was just in his head again, that maybe the threat was internal, not external. Edward swallowed the pills. He leaned against the counter, waiting for the chemical calm to kick in. And he waited for the sound. He expected the pounding on the door. He expected the siren to scream right outside the window. He expected the house to be surrounded, but there was nothing. No police followed him to the door. No one knocked. The street outside was dead quiet. Now you have to look at that silence and ask the hard question. Why didn't the boots come up the driveway? Edward isn't a fool. He knows procedure. If that was a lawful order, if that was a legitimate arrest in progress, that officer calls for backup. The perimeter gets set. The door gets knocked on. You don't chase a suspect to a house and then just shrug and drive away. Unless you can't. That silence planted a seed in Edward's head that is colder than the Indiana winter. It mixed with the pills in his system and created a terrible doubt. On one hand, maybe his wife was right. Maybe the trauma finally snapped and he saw monsters where there were just shadows. But the other option is worse. What if he wasn't a cop? Anyone can buy a flashing light online. Anyone can buy a uniform. Predators use authority because they know people are trained to comply. They know good people, rule followers, will get on the ground when told. If Edward had complied, if he had laid down on that dark sidewalk in a strange neighborhood, what would have happened next? Because that car didn't call it in. That officer didn't want a paper trail. When Edward ran, when he showed he was a hard target who would fight back, the predator cut his losses and vanished. That thought keeps Edward awake at night. He didn't just run from an arrest. He might have run from a monster. Edward drew a line on the map that night. He never went back. Not the next year, and not the year after that. When December rolls around now, and the family starts planning the trip to Indianapolis, Edward stays behind. He tells his wife he has to work, or that his back is acting up, but she knows. She sees the look in his eyes when the invitation comes. It costs him. He has 2 daughters who are growing up without really knowing their cousins. They ask why Daddy never comes to Uncle's house for Christmas. They ask why they have to go alone. Edward doesn't have an answer that makes sense to a child. He can't explain that an entire state is now a no-fly zone for him. He can't explain that he isn't avoiding a place. He's avoiding a memory. He sits at home in Maryland, alone in a quiet house, while his family celebrates 500 miles away. He avoids the guilt, but he can't avoid the fear. That's the real price of that night. It didn't end with handcuffs, but it ended with a life divided. A family split apart every holiday, all because he refused to get on the ground.